Good morning, brothers and sisters. We have been blessed this morning by the music and the prayer of the soul that's been offered up to in our behalf. So grateful to be here, representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And respectfully, I give thanks to the sponsoring entity, the Salt Lake Pioneer Chapter of the National Society of the Sons of Utah Pioneers. Grateful also for the music, as I've mentioned, for Sister Garlic, Brother Maddox, and the Salt Lake Institute Choir, as well as the royalty of the 47 beautiful voices, and your pianist, Sister Kinnersley. I've been wondering what my secret power is. I don't think I have one, but I can tell you what I don't have. I don't read very well without glasses. Now, fun fact, I forgot my glasses. So I'm using my wife's, and we have different prescriptions. Today we celebrate the 177th anniversary of the arrival of Brigham Young and the first company of pioneers to this valley. Today we celebrate and remember the faith of more than 70,000 Latter-day Saints who, before the completion of the Continental Railroad in 1869, crossed the plains on foot, by horseback, in ox-drawn wagons, pushing or pulling hand carts, containing all the worldly possessions that they owned. In my estimation, this was the greatest generation. The story of Brigham Young's first view of the Great Salt Lake Valley has been often told, but will never be diminished in the retelling. We have a sacred responsibility to keep our history bright and place the memory of it firm in the hearts of each successive generation. Unless we remember our pioneer heritage, we cannot learn from or appreciate the legacy that they left us. On July 24, 1847, the Prophet Brigham was lying on a makeshift bed in a carriage owned and driven by Wilford Woodruff. They left their camp at the head of Emigration Canyon early that morning to make the final leg of the descent from the narrow and steep confines of the canyon. Brigham had fallen ill 12 days earlier with mountain fever, a case of tick bite. He had become so sick that for a time, the brethren who traveled with him feared that he would not survive. On July 22nd, Brigham was still too sick to travel, and so he sent some of the company ahead with a message for Erastus Snow and Orson Pratt to go forward into the valley and select a convenient place for plowing and the planting of potatoes primarily, with some beans and corn. They were the first of the pioneers to set foot in the valley. On the morning of July 24, the prophet felt well enough to resume his journey. Wilford drove his carriage down the steep canyon to a vantage point overlooking the valley. Brother Woodruff preserved the moment in his later recollections. Quote, "On the 24th, I drove my carriage with President Young lying on a bed in it into the open valley, the rest of the company following when we came out of the canyon into full view of the valley. I turned the side of my carriage around, open to the west, and President Young arose from his bed and took a survey of the country. While gazing on the scene before us, he was enwrapped in vision for several minutes. He had seen the valley before in vision, and upon that occasion, he saw the future glory of Zion and Israel, as they would be, planted in the valleys of these mountains. When the vision had passed, he said, 'It is enough. This is the right place. Drive on.'" Those immortal words inspire us even today, and inspire the activities of the associations that sponsor us here today. In true Latter-day Saint fashion, committees were immediately formed. One to select ground for planting, one to organize and repair the plows and other implements necessary for cultivation, and another committee was formed to care for teams of oxen, so that fresh teams were available to substitute for the tired ones. The site selected for the first planting you may know, lies just 3 blocks from where we now sit. It occupied the place where the city and county building now stands. The land was so hard that it made plowing difficult. In fact, several plows were broken in the attempt. It is not known who came up with the solution, but soon the men dammed off and diverted the stream Brother Brigham had named City Creek to bring water to the hard, dry ground. After a little soaking, the soil yielded to the plow, and within a few days, about 5 acres had been planted. In addition to potatoes, the men planted beans and corn. Remarkable, isn't it? That the first actions taken by the Latter-day Saints in the Salt Lake Valley were to pray, form committees, organize labor, start an irrigation system, and begin planting crops. Not so much different than we are today as a church. On Monday, July 26, though still very weak and recovering, Brigham wanted to climb a mountain he had seen in his first view of the valley. With a small group, President Young made the arduous climb to the top of Ensign Peak. Using a telescope provided by Heber C. Kimball, they looked out over the valley. This view gave this little group of leaders a perspective which they would need in planning the layout and development of the city. It was also while surveying the valley on this occasion that the prophet determined where the temple should be located. 2 days later, on July 28, Brigham marked the temple site by planting his walking stick in the ground and declaring, "Here we will build the temple of our God." With the driving of his walking stick into the dry ground, President Young began the unfolding and literal fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. "And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it." There was nothing more important in the mind of the prophet than erecting a house to the name of the Lord. July 26 was not the first time the prophet Brigham had seen Ensign Peak. He recognized it from a vision he had been shown following the death of the prophet Joseph. Thankfully, George A. Smith recorded the vision. Quote, "After the death of Joseph Smith, when it seemed as if every trouble and calamity had come upon the saints, Brigham Young sought the Lord to know what they should do and where they should lead the people for safety. And while they were fasting and praying daily on the subject, President Young had a vision of Joseph Smith, who showed him the mountain that we now call Ensign Peak, immediately north of Salt Lake City, and there was an ensign that fell upon that peak. And Joseph said, 'Build under the point where the colors fall, and you will prosper and have peace.' From these miraculous beginnings, the city of God was built, a society of saints was established, a religion flourished free from persecution, and an engine of industry and colonization was put into motion. This building of a nation was the product of the faith of the early saints on the trail and the resolve and labor of those same saints as they arrived in Salt Lake. In both places, they were willing to put their shoulders to the wheel and push along despite the hardship and suffering that such would require. Brigham's company was the first to make the journey, the Great Salt Lake Valley, but far from the last. Over the next 21 years, until 1869, when the Golden Spike was driven, it is estimated that between 70 and 80,000 pioneers traveled to Utah in wagon and handcart companies. Most of the pioneers made the 1,000-mile journey on foot. Along the way, approximately 2,000 lost their lives. The heaviest toll of suffering and loss of life was in the Martin and Willie handcart companies of 1856, who started late on their journey and encountered the most severe winter conditions imaginable without sufficient clothing or coverings to protect them. At one location is found the common grave of 13 of that company who perished in one night. Approximately 20% of the members of these two companies lost their lives on the journey. For most of the other companies of pioneers, hardship was constant. Physical toll was a necessity for men, women, and children. Food was often scarce, and death occasionally struck the old and the infirm among them. But there was joy, and even merrymaking, and sociality. These intrepid pioneers knew the way would be hard, and some might not survive, but they came anyway. For their faith and their hope in the promise of God was far greater than their fear of the journey. And they cared for one another along the way, and for those that followed, often wearing out and laying down their own lives in the service of the weaker ones among them. Greater love hath no man that a man lay down his life for his friends. Every one of us has heard the stories of hardship, deprivation, and death that afflicted the men, women, and children of the pioneers, especially those of the handcart companies. For many of us, these stories are of our own ancestors, preserved in books and memories of succeeding generations. For others, the stories of faith are the legacy we have inherited as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In hardship and suffering, faith was forged. No sacrifice was too great for those committed to their covenants. When asked about the hardship and suffering of his journey with the Martin Handcart Company, Francis Webster reflected on his experience and the blessings he had received as a member of that seemingly ill-fated company. Quote, "We suffered beyond anything you can imagine, and many died of exposure and starvation. But did you ever hear a survivor of that company utter a word of criticism? Every one of us came through with the absolute knowledge that God lives, for we became acquainted with him in our extremities. Was I sorry that I chose to come by handcart? No, neither then nor any minute of my life. The price we paid to become acquainted with God was a privilege to pay," end quote. Most pioneer experiences were not accompanied by suffering as severe as befell the Martin and Willie Handcart companies. But all who traveled that sacred trail sacrificed and endured the hardships of the journey. It was in a crucible of such experiences, that the early saints became firm as the mountains around us. In most cases, these early saints were already possessed of a deep and abiding faith before setting out on the trial. It was this faith that strengthened them to set out on the trail. But in the journey, their faith became unshaken. My great-great-great-grandmother, Catherine Jones Bennett, was raised in Conisquay, Wales. Because of a remarkable vision given to her father, John Jones, the family was prepared to receive the gospel when Brigham Young and a companion first came to their village. They were baptized August 20, 1841. In May 1860, 20 years later, Benjamin, age 62, the husband of my great-great-great-grandmother, Catherine, and Catherine, age 67, and their youngest child, Elizabeth, responded to the call to gather with the saints. They sailed to New York, then went on to Florence, Nebraska, where the saints were staging to take the trek across the plains. The rest of their children did not have the funds necessary for the trip. Catherine was too old for the journey. Took a tremendous physical toll on her, yet she persevered. 100 miles from Salt Lake City. When the journey was almost complete, Catherine succumbed to her ailments. She was buried in the thin soil of Wyoming near the banks of the Muddy River on September 27, 1860. There was neither time nor resources to set a permanent marker for her grave. The rest of Benjamin and Catherine's family migrated to Utah 3 years later, without knowing that their mother had met her end on the trail. In their journey, Catherine's children unknowingly passed within a short distance from her unmarked grave near Fort Bridger, Wyoming. They only learned of her passing upon their arrival in Salt Lake City. But in October 2023, I was assigned to preside at a state conference in the Bridger Valley, Wyoming state. At the invitation of President Michael Kunzler and his wife, my wife and I spent an enjoyable Friday afternoon with President and Sister Kunzler following part of the Pioneer Trail. As we scrambled down the rocky terrain, where grooves from wagon wheels are still visible, we came to a spot on the muddy where the saints had camped. President Kunzler was excited to show me a gravesite, which had been restored, and a marker placed to tell the story. Both he and I were unaware of my relationship to that grave. It was only after we began to read the marker that I realized this was the grave of Catherine Jones Bennett, my ancestral grandmother. This was the grave. This was the grave her own children had passed by without knowing of her death. I shed tears of joy for this faithful woman who had joined with the saints of God, seeking a place God had prepared in the West, so far away from her home in Wales. What can we learn from our heroic pioneers? How can lessons from their lives and their experiences help us navigate a very different, though equally treacherous journey, trying to find a place of spiritual safety in the world today? To find an answer, I think it's helpful to return to January 1846. The Quorum of the 12 had finalized plans for the exodus of church members from Nauvoo in the face of severe persecution. In accordance with the prophetic direction given by Joseph Smith before his death, it had been determined to gather the saints in the valleys of the Rocky Mountains. Preparations were underway. By early February, thousands of saints received ordinances of the Melchizedek priesthood in the newly constructed Nauvoo temple and were prepared for the unknown trials that lay ahead. They left Nauvoo in the deep grip of winter, tears frozen to their cheeks, trusting in the power of the Lord to sustain them and guide them to a place God had prepared. They knew their prophet had spoken. In April 1846, shortly after the saints were driven from Nauvoo, Brigham Young contemplated the long and uncertain trail the saints would take across the plains. He anticipated the hardship and suffering they would be required to endure. Brigham then asked William Clayton to write a song that would encourage the people in their darkest times. It is said that within 2 hours of that request, William Clayton had penned the lyrics to the beloved hymn, "Come, Come Ye Saints." Surely the Lord revealed this hymn as a comfort and a strength to his people in their coming trials. Come, come ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day. 'Tis better far for us to strive, our useless cares for us to drive. Do this, and joy your hearts will swell. All is well, all is well. We'll find the place which God for us prepared, far away in the west, where none shall come to hurt or make afraid. There the saints will be blessed. We'll make the air with music ring, shall praises to our God and King. Above the rest, these words we'll tell. All is well, all is well. And should we die before our journey's end, through happy day, all is well. We then are free from toil and sorrow too. With the just we shall dwell. But if our lives are spared again, to see the saints their rest obtain, oh, how we'll make this chorus swell. All is well, all is well. In January 1847, Brigham Young received a revelation. It was called The Word and the Will of the Lord concerning the camp of Israel in their journey to the West. This is the only revelation given to Brigham Young contained in the Doctrine and Covenants. There were some principles that came from it. The Lord instructed the saints to organize themselves and to follow the direction of the 12. He required them to prepare for the journey with a covenant and a promise to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord. And then he reminded them that his arm was the same strong arm that had led the children of Israel out of Egypt. In a forewarning of the challenges that were to come in the emigration of the church to the west, the Lord said in this revelation, "My people must be tried in all things, and that they may be prepared to receive the glory that I have for them, even the glory of Zion." For the members of the church, this was the word of the Lord. They also relied on other promises God had given through Joseph Smith. Well, you cannot behold with your natural eyes for the present time the design of your God concerning those things which shall come hereafter, and the glory which shall follow after much tribulation. For after much tribulation cometh the blessings. Though they could not have imagined how it would be fulfilled, the pioneers trusted in the Lord's promise that their individual efforts, small as they may have felt them to be as they traversed the trail, would be magnified by the Lord. Wherefore be not worried in well-doing, for you are laying the foundation of a great work, and out of small things proceedeth that which is great. If we were to assess the influence of the pioneers upon our society of Latter-day Saints, we would need to go no further than to review the hymns that have been written concerning them. For example, "Firm as the mountains around us, stalwart and brave we stand, on the rock our fathers planted for us in this goodly land. The rock of honor and virtue, of faith in the living God, they raised his banner triumphant over the desert sod." How can we apply the principles and lessons learned from the courageous faith, toil, and sacrifice of our honored pioneers? The challenges of our day are different than those faced by the pioneers. The journey we are called to travel is not characterized by extreme physical suffering of the trail or a deprivation of the material necessities of life. Neil Maxwell explained that the special spirits who have been reserved to live in this time will one day be praised for their stamina by those who pulled hamstrings. Let me suggest 5 principles we can learn from the examples of our faithful pioneer ancestors that will apply with equal force in withstanding the temptations of our day and completing the journey God has given us. First, trust in God and his promises. Second, love and sustain our living prophets and heed their prophetic vision. Third, covenant with God to obey his commandments and keep your covenant. Fourth, press forward until the journey's end without fear of what may come. And fifth, sacrifice for those with whom you travel and for those who are yet to come. On this day of celebration, we honor those who have gone before. We build on the foundation of their lives and the purity of their examples. May God Almighty bless us to endure with similar faith and fortitude the challenges of our day. And when the journey is done, may we join in chorus in singing, "All is well, all is well." I leave my testimony, this is God's work. This is his church. This is still the right place. Let us drive on. In the name of Jesus Christ.